Ladies and gentlemen, I just edited a full course by Dr. James D. Tabor on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and today we're discussing, what is it, James, the top 4 parallels to Jesus with the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Yeah, whenever people even see the title of the course, there's the Dead Sea Scrolls and there's Jesus. But Jesus and the Dead Sea Scrolls, Jesus in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we're not doing that. I don't think that's actually a valid position. But why would you pair those? And I was just going to give you the top 4 reasons. And what do you think?
I'm excited. Look, I edited this thing and I know what kind of masterpiece you've put into this. In fact, I'm rewatching it now, James, and it's remarkable how deep you go into the history and what are the implications of this. So first of all, I might ask the question, why are we paralleling this to Jesus before we open this can of worms?
Okay, let me start by saying every one of these parallels, these 4 we're going to cover now, you could not say about any other groups that we know from ancient Judaism. So everybody's heard of the Pharisees. That's in the New Testament. Everybody's heard of the Sadducees. The Sadducees and the Pharisees do not share any of these. Now, if the Essenes is the group that wrote the scrolls, and there's a whole lecture on that, we're not going to do that today, but, maybe you could parallel them partly from that. But our only account of the Essenes is Josephus, and he doesn't mention any of these 4. In other words, I'm going to give you the top 4, and Josephus is describing the Essenes, and he doesn't mention any of these. Doesn't mean he's not describing this group, but it means that he doesn't want you to know because he's probably trying to protect them. Remember, Josephus writes after the Jewish war. Total disaster for the country, the temple, the city of Jerusalem is brought down, and this group is scattered. And I think he likes them, he admires them. He says in his biography that when he was a teenager, 17, 18 years old, that he went in the desert for 3 years and studied with a desert prophet or figure. So he probably has some sympathy, although he's gone on in his life, even knows the emperor of Rome, Vespasian, and so forth. So, you ready for the top 4? They can be in any order, but I'm going to start with the one that I think shocked you the most because we were talking about this very recently. When I say New Covenant, and you hold up a Bible, and it's got Old Testament, New Testament, and you open it up, and the Apostle Paul talks about we are ministers of a new covenant. If you think about Jewish literature before the time of Jesus, guess what? There is no group that I know of in any record, say from the exile, 6th century BC, all the way down to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70. There's no group that says, oh, the new covenant's here. We're the people of the new covenant. This group calls themselves the New Covenanters. Wow, think about that. Now, we date them about 150 BCE. We can't get an exact date on when their teacher, and we're going to talk about their teacher, flourished. But basically, I like to say 150 years before Jesus, there's a group that is talking about we are the people of the new covenant. Now that comes from Jeremiah 31, verse 31. It's easy to remember. 31:31. And what does it say? That God will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And then it goes on to describe this very ideal time, putting the Torah in the heart and so forth. Flash forward, and what do we get? Jesus of Nazareth coming. He takes a cup, we're told, and says, this is the cup of the new covenant at one of the ceremonial meals. We read about that in the Gospel of Mark. I already mentioned Paul says we're the people of the new covenant. So I consider that one of the top, among the top 4 that we want to cover today. New Covenanters. So the groups are both saying that, but it's not a matter, I don't think, of the Jesus movement or the John the Baptist Jesus movement, I like to call it, or the John the Baptist Jesus James movement. copying. My students always raise their hand and go, so Dr. Tabor, did the Jesus folks copy the Dead Sea Scrolls? You know what I mean by copy.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, that's not your idea. You're doing what those people did. Like little kids, you copied. Not like that at all. But they are reading the same text. They're calculating the time of the end. Lots of groups during the period before, during, and after Jesus. And this goes back to the Maccabees about 150 BCE. They think they're in the time of the end. So we get these apocalyptic kinds of ideas in some of our literature. So New Covenant, wow, they're both saying this is it. This is the New Covenant, which means the kingdom of God is very near. Now, another one that connects to that, if you open up the Gospel of Mark, and we've got a course on the Gospel of Mark, a lot of people have taken it that will be hearing this video. You'll remember this. It opens with John the Baptist, and you basically want to know, well, who are you or what are you doing? It's the way the Gospel of Mark opens. And what does he say? I'm the voice of one crying in the wilderness. Prepare the way of the Lord. So Christians know that. It's in Handel's Messiah. It's in all kinds of literature and images, and I heard it all my life growing up, going to Sunday school. I'm sure you heard it too when you had associations with the churches over the years. John the Baptist preparing the way in the wilderness. Well, that's a prophecy from the book of Isaiah. So we open up the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the first document we study in the course is the community rule. That's what scholars call it. But you know what it's really called? Serek Hayakad, which means the way or the right way of the community, the order literally of the community. This is what we're all about. It's like saying, what are you people all about? What are you doing? Describe yourself to us. And what do they say? This is the time for preparing the way in the wilderness, as it is written, prepare the way in the wilderness. And it says they've gone out by the Dead Sea. And that's actually the technical word in Hebrew in Isaiah 40, verse 3. It uses the word desert, but it also uses Aravah. And Aravah is geographical. I could get in a taxi at Tel Aviv airport in Israel and tell a cab driver, could you take me to the Aravah? You know what he would say? You want to go to the Dead Sea, Dr. Tabor? It's the Dead Sea. So John the Baptist is up and down the Jordan River. We see that in the Gospel of Mark. We open the very first scroll that tells us about this group and what they're all about, like their charter, basically. And they say, it's time to prepare the way in the desert. And so they've actually moved out there. So what a parallel. Now, the other two I'm going to mention are more broad, but when I describe them to you, you'll see they're still very, very specific. What about apocalyptic, messianic? Now, we know that there are apocalyptic figures during the 1st century BC and the 1st century CE or AD. Josephus lists 13 of them, including Jesus. That's one of the people we think he mentions. It's not as though no one was apocalyptic. They're figures that are apocalyptic. But as far as the literature of a movement that you can actually study and say, what are the texts that they covered? And what is their idea? The key is the word way. There are a lot of Christians that have started reading the New Testament or maybe just growing up in the church. And if I say the way, the book of Acts uses it in a very strange manner. I started to say a very strange way. Why? Because it'll say, and so persecuted the way. What do you mean? What way? It's like it's used as a proper name for the group. And guess what? This group also says, we are preparing the way. In other words, we're the way preparers out in the desert. And they have the same kind of idea, that language. In other words, we're people of the way. And the Jesus people are saying, we're people of the way. But they're separated by over 100 years. So various individuals might have been, talking about the time is near, the time is at hand, surely we're near the kingdom, because they are all reading the book of Daniel, And there is a prophecy in the book of Daniel that you really can't stretch out more than about 500 years. Literally, it's a 490-year period, Daniel 9. And Christians try to trace it to Jesus, and the Dead Sea Scroll group traced it to their teacher, which we'll talk about at some point. But they're all kind of thinking this is the time. Josephus even says in Book 6 of the Jewish War, when he's talking about the revolts that took place, that he witnessed, that he was even a part of initially till he went over with the Romans because he realized the Jews are going to get defeated, and he didn't want more bloodshed. He says that what most incited them to revolt against the Romans was an oracle in our holy books that about this time God would raise up a Messiah, a ruler, an anointed one. And so he's even witnessing that it was these textual expectations. Well, let me tell you, the Dead Sea Scroll group are people of the book. They are poring over these prophecies, and they are trying to figure them out. And when we go to the New Testament, what do we find? It's written after, in retrospect, but they're going back to Jesus and they're saying, oh, this is the time for this. This is the time for that. Look how this was fulfilled. Look how that is near. And finally, Paul, in one of his letters, 1 Corinthians, in chapter 7, he says, the appointed time of the end has grown very short. And he even tells people, maybe you shouldn't even get married. When Jesus covers that in Mark 13, we covered it in the Mark course, he says, this generation will not pass till all these things are fulfilled. So you get the idea as you're reading Mark that it's almost breathless. You know, immediately this and immediately that. And it leads up to that climax that you're going to see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven, which is, again, Daniel 7. And that's when the kingdom of God is set up and all the kingdoms of the world are overthrown. So this group expects to see that. But guess what? What they most expected never happened. They thought they were going to defeat the Greeks and defeat the Romans and set up the kingdom of God. And the Romans came in 63 BC, and for the next few centuries, there's no independence. In fact, there's no independent Jewish state until modern times. So apocalyptic is one thing, but when you separate it by 150 years, and you got another group prior to the Jesus movement saying some of the same things. So apocalyptic, people of the way, new covenant, Messianic. And you say, well, what do you mean Messianic? I mean, that's just very generic. Well, not for this group. They believe in a teacher and two messiahs. That's not in the New Testament, is it? Well, do you remember in Mark again? Isn't it interesting how we keep quoting Mark here? These are very related. In the Gospel of Mark, two of the apostles come up. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, right? They're the fishermen guys. And they come up to Jesus and they're just headed for Jerusalem and they think the kingdom's going to come and they're going to take over. And later they look at the temple and they say, look at all these buildings, as if to say, very soon we'll be occupying these things. They're very excited. You know what they ask? Lord, we know you're the master, but could one of us sit at your right hand and one at the left when we come into the kingdom? And Jesus rebukes them because they're arguing already about, am I on first? Are you on second? Who's on first? This kind of thing. And so you get this idea in the Gospel of Mark that's very, very similar. Okay, you go to the scrolls, and what do we find? The teacher, as they call him, it's usually translated teacher of righteousness, but it really means the right teacher, the correct teacher. Like there are a lot of teachers, but this is the true teacher. He's also called the unique teacher. So their teacher, they believe, will be eventually accompanied by two other messiahs, one a priest and one Davidic. Now the Christians later put all that together, but in the Gospel of Mark, you can see that they're already thinking about three figures, three messiahs, because the guy in the middle is anointed of the Spirit. That's the teacher in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they talk about he's the teacher until the coming of the messiahs of Aaron and Israel. That's the priest and the king. So apocalyptic, messianic expectations, people of the way, new covenant. In the course, we thoroughly explain all of those. We read the text. This is a textually based course. When we're studying this, I don't just get up and talk to you and tell you all these things. I'm summarizing it now. We've got our nose in the book. We read the scrolls, and I give you copies of the main things that we cover. And also we recommend that you get the book that has all the scrolls, because I want this to be a springboard for everybody that takes it. You know, maybe you've never read the scrolls, or you've heard of the scrolls, or you looked at them once, but you wonder, like, well, how would you even begin? Imagine somebody starting to study the New Testament, and they barely even know who Jesus is. Maybe they've heard his name, but they don't know anything about it. How would you start? Where would you start? That's kind of how people are with the Dead Sea Scrolls. It just seems so much. You know, it's a big, thick book of 600 pages. We can't cover all 600 pages, but we cover the main text. This course will put you on your own feet so that you can go and do your own advanced study, because you'll have your orientation to the overall view, the chronology, the lay of the land, what was going on, and so forth. So this is the springboard course, I'm telling you. Maybe in the future we'll do like Dead Sea Scrolls 2 for the advanced people, who knows, where we can do all kinds of things with that. I've been working on these scrolls for like 40 years, and there's just so much, and I put a lot of it into the course in a summary way. This course is a college level course. And don't let that scare you away if you think, well, I don't know about a college level course. I don't mean some esoteric ivory tower course. I'm talking about the level of material and the way we approach it in an academic, historical way, learning the facts, learning the background, and so on. So just with those four, Derek, I think we've already got a pretty tight case. You know, here's the Dead Sea Scrolls. I got my 4 fingers here. And here's the Jesus movement. So they're like this, and we're putting them together, and all of a sudden we go, wow. Now, are they the same? We'll take the course, because we're going to explore differences as well, and even differences that they understand some of these 4 slightly differently. But the pattern and the basic matrix is there. So that's the point of the course. Jesus and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Compare and contrast. Try to sort it out.
I hope that people sign up because they have questions just from watching this. I have questions talking with you now that I know that we could cover during a Zoom call. That's the other advantage about taking the course, is we'll be able to talk with you in a Zoom call, very personal, one-on-one kind of thing. Well, it's a big group, but you know what I mean? Like, it's not just you lecturing. Yeah. And there's so many interesting questions that come just from that. I really appreciate you giving us these little sneak peek tidbits. I've been redoing the course myself. It is very deep. And when I say deep, I don't mean it's so deep that you don't understand it. No, you're very thorough is my point. And you explain what you mean and what you say and how. You have books out, you have text out, you have images that come up. You're very, very thorough. So I hope people will take the course. This also, just on a fundamental level, not only helps educate people, Dr. Tabor, but I feel like it also encourages scholars like you who have retired, you know, and who are still wanting to educate. I think you're going to, till the day you're gone, want to teach and want to give people the knowledge you've learned all these years. And so I hope people will take advantage of this opportunity to encourage you to keep teaching by taking your courses. So thank you.
And, you know, what do I love the most and what do I miss the most about full-time teaching? I taught for 43 years at 3 different major universities. You know what I miss the most? The students. And I still have students all over the world, and students, you know, that keep up with me and so on. But I get excited about this. And it's true of anything that you study. When you really get excited and you're really into it, what do you want to do most of all? You want to share it and talk about it. And I know from the Mark course, Derek, you were at some of those Zoom meetings, and we might have 200 people, because it's not a webinar, like you said. Everybody can come into the room. And, you know, we're polite. We raise our hands and we talk and so forth. But it's not just me giving another lecture. We're meeting, and we do field your questions, and you can have responses and so forth. And the thing about that is that builds a community of people. You know, I started feeling in the Mark course like I knew a couple of hundred people by name. And, you know, then you have email contact with me. You have all kinds of other ways of learning more. People write me all the time and say, well, what's the next book I should read? I took this, but what about this? And we'll be glad to guide you in that. Derek, you as a whole, with your channel, and that's why I like working with you, you've created an amazing community out in the world. It's international, it's worldwide, it's all ages, and you have brought to the public, more than anyone I know on YouTube, a chance to hear from various scholars that have spent decades and decades working on this or that aspect with publishing books and so forth, and these courses that you've been offering. I just think it's a fantastic thing that you're doing, and I'm honored to be part of it. And I just love my students. I really do. I get such pleasure out of people learning and getting excited about these things.
And that's what I love about working with you, is that a lot of scholars are hesitant on going out, having to show face. Some of them barely. They got to drag themselves to go do a lecture at a university. Whereas you're trying to take the stuff that you know how hard it was to learn and to gather an insight, the languages, the sources, primary sources, digging in, dealing with the politics of the struggles of ideas and stuff. You know better than anyone that I've ever talked to on how difficult that is to traverse the world on those things. And you're bringing them down to anyone and everyone who has the interest in wanting to know it. I feel like we're having a new reformation on scholarship here. So I'm thankful to be part of it, and I'm glad that you are as well. And people can personally get to know you through this. So I hope people sign up.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add to that, there's a big move in the universities for what we're calling now public scholarship. I was chair of a department for 10 years. And it doesn't mean you go pop and you water down your standards or anything like that. But more and more universities are encouraging faculty to go to the scholarly meetings, to do the academic papers, but to also speak to the public, do radio interviews, do television, speak to large community groups. And I'm seeing that more and more with all of my colleagues. And I think it's just a wonderful move. And YouTube is part of that. It's a big part of that. There are a lot of amazing things on YouTube now that did not even exist 10 years ago. I think it's really exciting.
And to keep that going, people who are signing up are helping that. So just thank you to the viewer as well. And James, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Derek.